Good afternoon, everyone. It is so wonderful to see you, Rebecca. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you everyone for attending today. It is my great honor to welcome Rebecca to today's talk. Rebecca Dabani is a textile artist, a researcher, teacher, who came to Paris to study haute couture embroidery in 2017. And I gather has postponed her flight back to Ireland ever since, understandably so, as if you're going to study haute couture, you're going to study it in Paris. So Rebecca has been thoroughly enchanted by the beauty, the culture, the history, the craftsmanship, and I think what really sets Paris apart is that appreciation for artisanship, which is becoming really less visible in our very homogenous world. And of course, Paris has that savoir-faire that you can't even articulate. So Rebecca is passionate about sharing her love of textiles and embroidery, the stories they reveal, especially narratives about women, and the connections they create. Rebecca has done embroidery for Dior and Yves Saint Laurent and Louis Vuitton, Valentino, Givenchy, Thierry Mugler, and Celine, and has created embroidered embellishments for Paris Fashion Week, gowns worn at the Met Gala Ball and the Cannes Film Festival. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Sonya, and thanks for such a great introduction.
Well, I just wanted to start today off by revealing a little bit about how Rebecca and I met. And it's quite the interesting story. It must have been, what, 5-6 years ago now, if not longer.
Yeah, I think it was about 5 years ago.
Yeah. So I actually flew into Chennai, India, and decided to stay in the city of Chennai. And I met my dear friend, Natalie Latham, for a day of leisure in Chennai before heading back to, or heading towards the ashram where I stay yearly. And Natalie and I were having breakfast that morning at this wondrous, magical little cafe in Chennai, and Rebecca was sitting at the table next to us. And Natalie and Rebecca also coincidentally met a day before, and here we were meeting Rebecca yet again. So it was an incredible synchronous moment. And here we are. Rebecca was teaching in Abu Dhabi at the time and came to Chennai to really explore Chennai, to explore embroidery, and felt really called. So Rebecca, the floor is yours. Tell us a little bit about what you were doing in Chennai to start, and we'll take it from there.
Okay, absolutely. So I was in Chennai on a winter break, and as you said, I was hoping to see some Indian culture and some embroidery and just discover the country. And as we mentioned, we had our very serendipitous meeting, which was fantastic. And it was actually at that coffee that Natalie suggested a few people that I should meet when I was in Chennai. And through one thing led to another. And I ended up being invited to the haute couture embroidery atelier of a man named Jean-Francois Lesage, who comes from a very long line of haute couture embroiderers. So I thought, this is a very interesting sign, because I was actually at that time working in Abu Dhabi with the hopes of saving money to go to Paris and study at École Lesage, which was established by this man's father. So it was a little bit more than a sign. There was no way I could ignore it. And then I went and visited the wonderful ashram. And after that, I continued on to Pondicherry, where I had another very serendipitous meeting in regards to embroidery. And I had the opportunity to visit an embroidery school that's run by the Cluny Order of Nuns. They're a French order of nuns, and they run this embroidery school for vulnerable women. So single mothers, orphans, or widows. And what was fascinating for me was two things. The first thing was that I had worked for 4 years as an art teacher in the Cluny School in Ireland.
Wow.
So yeah. And then the second thing was the power that embroidery had to transform these women's lives. And that through such a beautiful craft, they were able to support themselves and then support their families. So I was only in India for about 2 weeks, but by the time I got back to Abu Dhabi, I knew that I was definitely going to Paris. I was definitely going to be studying at École Lesage, and I signed up and registered as soon as I could.
So I just want to touch a little bit about École Lesage, because it's really one of a kind. It's a very prestigious school with lots of incredible archives. If I understood correctly, they hold the largest collection of embroidery art in the world. They have over 70,000 samples.
You're right, Sonia. They have 70,000 examples of embroidery that they've done they've created over about 150 years. And the House of Lesage was established at the turn of the 20th century. So if you can imagine, during the 1920s, when everybody was wearing beaded gowns and dancing in the jazz clubs in Paris, there was a huge demand for this embroidery. And they had actually taken over another embroidery house that had been established during the Belle Epoque, or the Edwardian era. So all of that fabulous haute-couture fashion designs, so stunning embroidery, everything done by hand. So Lesage has this really spectacular collection of embroidery archives dating back through the centuries, or through the decades. Yeah.
And just to return to this theme of artisanship, this is again, a wonderful example when a school has a mission to ensure that these artisans don't die along with their secrets, right? Because so much of this information, this craft, is passed down, and sometimes orally, and not enough people are really familiar with the secrets of the craft. So that's also a really important theme for this particular school.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think secret is a very interesting word there, because there are loads of secrets that are shared across the studios. Now the studios are very, very quiet places. You can literally hear a pin drop.
Wow.
But the idea is that the techniques of the embroiderers haven't changed in about 150 years.
Wow.
What does change is the materials that the embroiderers are using. So the embroiderers have to use all of this savoir-faire and craft that's been passed down to adapt their skills to the new fantastical materials that the designers want them to work with. So, yeah.
So, Rebecca, here you are in Chennai, and you meet Francois Lesage in Chennai.
Yes.
I mean, that is remarkable. And what was it like touring the studio in Chennai?
I'll be honest, Sonia, there were some tears. I had never seen haute-couture embroidery up close. I've never seen it being done by that. There's no haute-couture embroidery industry in Ireland. So the fact that I was right beside these embroiderers, looking at their work, even touching their work, I had never seen anything so beautiful for me. And I had spent, when I was doing my degree in Dublin, I used to spend hours in the library poring over the books about haute couture fashion and haute couture embroidery, and dreaming of someday making it to France to work on these pieces. So I think when you see haute couture embroidery in photographs or in museums, it's one thing, it's really breathtaking. But when you see it up close like that, you can't help but appreciate the hours and the patience and the beauty.
Beautiful. And then from there, just to
Yeah.
touch a little bit about your experience with the nuns in Pondicherry, that was also a very moving experience for you, especially because they were doing this to help the poor, you know, sometimes abused, sometimes helpless women in their community.
That's right. Yeah, and I had previously seen the power of embroidery to provide particularly women with financial independence in India in Mexico. In 2015, I did quite a large research trip traveling around Mexico, interviewing craftspeople about embroidery and what it meant for them. And the Mexican women were very generous of their time, and they shared stories of how embroidery had been passed down through generations of women in their families, and how the money that they get, the income that they gained from embroidery, gave them financial independence and more voice in their community and more control. And for me, it was wonderful to see that, like, you know, across however many continents between Mexico and India, that embroidery once again had this power to educate and provide an income for women. And also that it's through something that's so beautiful.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And I know that that has stayed with you, this dedication to that narrative and to explore these narratives for women in all of what you do and all of what you produce.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that I would love to, or I hope to work on further in the future. Just the idea, sometimes when I ask women about their embroidery, they're surprised that I ask. And they want to know why I'm asking. And I just think once you start literally unraveling the thread, these fascinating stories are revealed that we just don't take the time to ask. And I think it's important now, actually, in my opinion, now more so than ever, that we start hearing these stories.
Beautiful. So take me back a little bit and tell me a little bit about how you developed this interest at all. Where did it begin for you?
For me, it was actually when I was in university, and I had really the pleasure of studying embroidery as a fine art practice, where embroidery was seen as a way of expressing a concept in a similar way to painting or sculpture. And to coincide with that, or to, I suppose, underpin that, I also studied fashion and dress history.
Right.
And that,
Perfect.
yeah. Oh, yeah, it was wonderful. So like I said, I would spend half my time in the library looking at lovely pictures, and I would spend the other time in the studio creating embroidery. And I was always inspired and motivated by literature and poetry that speaks about women and their experience in the 19th and early 20th century. So I think for me, it has always coincided embroidery and women's stories, and just that historical aspect to it.
Rebecca, can you tell us a little bit about what is particularly specific about haute couture French embroidery compared to other types of embroidery? Maybe you can walk us through technically so we have a full understanding of what we're talking about.
Okay, absolutely. I'll try my best. So I think oftentimes embroidery can be divided into certain sections. They make it easier anyway. You can think of an embroidery as a craft for leisure. Embroidery can also have very important cultural significance, and it can be used for anthropology or ethnography. And then you have embroidery in the I suppose the area of fashion. And that's where haute-couture embroidery sits.
Mm.
And I suppose this is something that's also changing at the moment, but because it sits in the area of fashion, it can be a bit dismissed sometimes as not being an art form or not being a fine craft. But in actual fact, haute couture embroidery reveals these fascinating stories and histories of heritage, craftsmanship, and so forth. And it actually, I suppose there's a very long history in France of appreciation for luxury, and very famous people like Madame de Pompadour, the official mistress of the king. She was fascinated by embroidery and was a very accomplished embroiderer. And what happened was that when the kings were still ruling in Versailles, there was a very strong trade of foreign embroideries and luxury textiles that were coming mainly from the East. And the French court had a voracious appetite for these like really superb, embellished fashions and textiles.
And very rare.
Extremely rare. Yeah, completely different to how we would understand fashion or luxury now. Like it would have taken years for these. They were being delivered by boats, or people traveling distances that would have been much longer in reality than they are now. Yeah,
I mean, that whole silk route trade is incredibly interesting, and sericulture didn't exactly take off in France, but it certainly was appreciated.
Oh yeah, I mean the French appreciation for silk is well known. There's a town, Lyon, where they were very famous for silk weaving, and the French have very strong trade routes and very strong buying power as well. And they had, like I was saying, they had a very, and still do have a very high appetite for fine things. And whilst I suppose the climate didn't suit sericulture, they were able to develop silk weaving, as I mentioned, and silk thread production centers in France.
Rebecca, can you talk a little bit about Lunaville Embroidery and
Yep.
how does that work, and what's that specific hook?
Oh, very good. I like it. So Lunaville embroidery is a kind of embroidery that's done with a hook rather than a needle. And this technique actually developed again in Asia. It's still used today in India. And it traveled, like we were saying, across the Silk Route. And then it arrived in France in the 19th century via the port of Marseille. And it was Armenian traders who brought it in. And as I mentioned her previously, this hook arrived in Versailles, and Madame de Pompadour, who loved her embroidery anyway, took to this new embroidery hook and embroidering on an embroidery frame, which again actually originated in China. And it became the new way to do embroidery. And then
now, what's the technique that you use in your work?
Yeah, so the technique actually was developed even more in the town of Lunaville. So hence the name. Very interestingly, this was around the Belle Epoque, when like the fashions for lavish, ostentatious clothing, decadence and so on were huge. And there were towns dedicated to embroidery in France. And the mayor of this town, Lunaville, decided that there must be a quicker way to add beads and sequins rather than one by one. So he asked his embroiderers to turn their embroidery frames upside down.
Interesting.
Very interesting. And to have all their beads and sequins pre-strung on their threads. And it's a technique where you have one hand under the embroidery frame, another hand above the embroidery frame with the hook, and you're literally hooking the beads and the sequins in place. But what makes it particularly difficult is that you don't see what you're doing.
Oh my.
Yes. So this is that I learned in a collassage. So gradually you learn to feel what you're doing. And there's a little term of endearment here in France that says that embroiderers have their eyes in their fingertips.
Oh, how gorgeous. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very
That
poetic in
must
French.
be right.
Yeah.
It's you're using all of your senses.
Yeah,
Right? And
exactly.
your instincts.
Yeah, you get to know, and like bearing in mind also that the beads and the sequins that you're using are minuscule, like they're 2 millimeters, 3 millimeters, and you gradually learn when you've added one bead too many or two beads too many. You can feel that your fingers become more sensitive, or you just feel it. Yeah.
So Rebecca, I think a lot of people are really interested in your experience working in haute couture embroidery. So we'd love to hear some of your highlights. And how does it work? We want to know the behind the scenes secrets of the ateliers.
Okay, no problem. I'll share my secrets with you too. Well, after I'd finished my training in a collassage, which took 6 months, but they were 6 very, very intense months. I was working about 14 hours a day, Monday to Sunday. You know, there were quick breaks
when you say working, walk us through those 14 hours. What were you doing?
Yeah, well, I had classes 3 days a week, and each class was 3 hours.
Okay.
And in each class, I learned 3 techniques, I think. And I'd be always introduced to a new material. So a new type of bead or a new type of sequin or a new type of thread. And then came the homework. So I only had 9 hours of class, but I actually had all the other side of that was then homework. So I would be carrying my huge embroidery frame on the metro in and out every day for 6 months, or every 3 days for 6 months. And then I take a quick break at home and I would get down to my embroidery, and I'd be embroidering until midnight, 1 o'clock.
Wow. Yeah. And so you qualified as a professional embroiderer from École des Sages. Yeah. And then what happened?
Yeah, absolutely. So I qualified from École des Sages as a professional embroiderer, and I just before finishing, I had asked the teachers what the next step was, because I absolutely loved doing the embroidery. And my teachers were saying that the best thing to do would be to sign up with a recruitment agency. So I was quite surprised that there was a recruitment agency for haute couture embroiderers.
Wow.
Yes.
Are there many recruitment agencies for haute couture embroiderers in Paris?
Actually, there are 3.
Wow. Right. That's very specific to that culture. That's extraordinary. That speaks volumes.
Isn't it? Yeah. I was really taken aback by that. And what the teachers had said was that if you work for recruitment agencies, you will be sent out to different studios and different ateliers. And they were saying that way you'll get to know which studios you like the best and which ateliers you like the best, and before you make kind of a final decision. And they were saying, you know, I get to be working with Chanel one day, Dior another, Yves Saint Laurent, and I get to see all these new techniques that I wanted to learn about. So, as I said,
where did you start? My
first job was in Chanel. Yeah, so it was a great start.
You didn't scrape the bottom of the barrel.
No. Well, I was really kind of incredulous, because it just could have never happened in Ireland, you know. There's no Chanel in Ireland. So I was really, really amazed by it. And it was just a short job working for 3 days. And then my next job, I was working for Louis Vuitton. And then that again was quite a short job. Like, they're just little short contracts. And I think what people I see there's a question here about how long does it take to embroider a dress? And
Mhm.
this became apparent as I spent more time in the studios. People often say, oh, you know, there's 100 hours work, or there's 200 hours work, or 300, 400, 500 hours work. And what I didn't realize was that, excuse me, that work is actually done at the last minute. So embroidery is the last thing to be done usually in the lead up to the fashion shows.
I see.
Yeah, so what happens is that all of a sudden you might have 50 embroiderers working on one gown, and they'll be working 12-hour days, 16-hour days, or sometimes through the night. So when you hear these long hours that go into the gowns, it's good to bear in mind that they're done by like loads of people, and that they're also done in a very concentrated amount of time, which I was to learn is very complicated, because you're doing something that's so meticulous. Like every millimeter counts. If you misplace a stitch by 2 millimeters, the chef d'atelier will see. They have amazingly laser beam eyes.
Wow. I bet.
Yeah, and they see, and you have to undo any stitching that's not perfect.
Wow.
Yeah, so I've literally been embroidering on frames when there have been people standing over us or behind us saying, you know, 5 minutes, 4 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute, and then it's taken off the frame and sent off to be stitched together and then put on the model. So
Wow.
yeah.
That you must have some strong adrenals.
That's it. Yeah. Lots of relaxation afterwards. Lots of deep breathing in the moment and relaxing afterwards. Yeah.
Tell us about Atelier Vermont and why that is special to you.
I without, I know you're not meant to have favorites. But I thought the first day that I worked in the Maison Lesage atelier, it really was for me like a dream come true. And I remember I was short of breath and everything. I was so excited. And this very austere French lady said to me, and who are you? And I said, oh, I'm Rebecca, and this is a dream come true for me. And she said, ah oui, ah oui.
So warm
So
and fuzzy.
fuzzy, yeah. And I really thought that that was the pinnacle. But then I was sent to work in Atelier Vermont, and Vermont have done the embroidery for Dior since the 1950s or 1960s, and I'm an absolutely huge fan of Christian Dior and their embroidery and their cut and so on and so forth. And I absolutely loved every minute of it. Everything I did was beautiful. All the materials were stunning. The chef d'atelier was actually my former teacher in École Lesage, and it was just really, it really was one of the best experiences for me. And it's unfortunate because you're absolutely forbidden from taking photographs in the studios. I
Right,
know,
right,
that's what I can't share.
right. Well, we do have a few photos for everyone today. I think this is actually a perfect moment to pivot towards the Lotus embroidery.
Yeah,
And we
okay.
can talk a little bit about that. Now, the Lotus embroidery is in progress. It's what you are working on currently.
That's right. That's right.
And it is actually to be auctioned off the second week of October for Green Shakti. And there may be some people here today that are not familiar with Green Shakti, so I just want to say a few words. Green Shakti is a nonprofit organization in South India, and it was founded by Sri Shakti Amma in 1996. And what's amazing about Green Shakti is that it is making a tremendous difference in reforestation, tree planting, recycling, education. You know, they have a variety of engaging educational programs for children to connect with Mother Earth. And since its inception, they have planted over 1.8 million trees locally, which is incredible. and rising, right? So that mission is very strong. And I think what we're seeing all over the world, and certainly in South India, is that there is massive job loss and massive poverty due to COVID-19 and lockdown. So what we're seeing is these green Shakti workers are the only ones in their families employed. And we have been raising money through Green Shakti to help this community, to help the Green Shakti workers. And this amazing Lotus Embroidery is meant to help these workers in South India. So I love that you chose a lotus flower first and foremost, because, you know, the lotus flower really is a miracle flower, right? So it's regarded in many different cultures, especially in Eastern religions, as a symbol of purity, of enlightenment, rebirth. But what I really love about the lotus is I feel it is a perfect analogy, you know, for the human condition, right? Because how does it grow? It grows out of muck. It grows out of dirty water against all odds, right? And what we see is probably the most divine flower. You know, it blooms and reblooms and perseveres. And I think that's why we see so many Hindu deities often sitting on lotus thrones. So I'd love to now share the screen just so we can show everyone what we're talking about here. So just one moment. So first of all, here you are. I just must show this wonderful photo of you. And
Yeah.
this is in your Paris studio, Paris home.
Yes, this is in my Paris home. And what I am sitting very, very proudly beside is my finished piece from a collassage.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, so that finished piece of embroidery qualifies me as a professional embroiderer. So that's what we'll be looking at a bit today.
Super. And what do we have here, Rebecca? Walk us through this.
Yeah, this is called a sampler. So this is what I did for the first 3 weeks or so of being in a collassage. And that was really about getting used to doing embroidery with the Lunaville hook. That technique I was saying where you're working from underneath, you're feeling your work. So what we're looking at now is we're looking at the finished piece. But when I was looking at it, when I was working on it, I was working on the back. So I couldn't see what I was doing. So the sequins that are added, the beads that are added and so forth, I had to learn how to feel them.
Wow.
Yeah, it was no small task.
And what is this exquisite needlework, Rebecca?
Yeah, this is a very, very close view of my finished piece that we saw on my desk. And that's the corner piece. And the pink beads are maybe about 3 millimeters inside, size, I mean. And the technique that's used there is called the vermicelli technique.
And what is the vermicelli technique?
It's very hard, Sonya.
I can see that. That I can see. Yeah.
That took me a long time to master. And there's about I think there's 1.5 meters of that technique the whole way around the piece. So by the time it's finished, you definitely know how to do it. Wow. And that technique was invented for Madeleine Vionney, the renowned fashion designer from the 1930s.
Yeah.
She always had her dresses cut on the bias, but she wanted to add beading to them. But because of the flow of her fabrics, the beading made them fall flat. So the Lesage Embroidery House invented this technique of adding beads specifically for Madeleine Vionney.
Amazing.
Yeah. It's fantastic.
But
Yeah.
this is a fun photograph of what I understand was the Met Ball. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. These were the gowns, some of them quite short, that were embroidered for the Met Gala ball by the Yves Saint Laurent house. So, like I was saying to you, my third job was in Yves Saint Laurent. So we were creating the gowns for the Met Gala ball, the Cannes Film Festival, Catherine Deneuve, Zoe Kravitz, and so on and so forth. So each of those gowns, like the dress that's second from the right, that looks black,
Yes.
that is black, that's actually entirely stitched with black sequins.
This one right here.
Oh, that one right there, I think is also sequins, but sorry, I meant second from the left. Sorry, excuse me.
This one right here?
That one right there, yeah.
Okay.
That's
wow. So that's entirely sequined.
Yeah, it is. And the one on to the right of the man, also in the shot, that's entirely sequins as well.
Amazing.
Yeah, yeah. So lots of work there.
So here we are at the Lotus Embroidery.
Yeah.
And would it be fair to say that it will take you about 60 hours to complete?
I think it would be fair to say that it will take me longer than 60 hours. Yeah.
So interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is the watercolor drawing for it. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. That's the initial sketch I did, where I was working out the design, what I wanted to include in that, and also really working on the colors, because I love the colors of the lotus, and the reflections of the water will be quite tricky to do, and the leaves as well. That'll be very interesting to do. So yeah.
And I loved that you included, for people who are unfamiliar, the very sacred Sanskrit, mantra Om Namo Narayane, which is I surrender to the divine.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I really wanted to include that in it. And you'll see here the design beside Overa Soie. So as much as possible, I decided in this design that I wanted to use silk, and as well as the finest French materials. So these are silk threads from a 200-year-old family-run business here in Paris. And they are the specialists in silk threads. And they're the only silk threads that the haute-couture houses will use.
Wow. What is the name of this family-run business?
The business is called Overa Soie.
I see. Amazing.
In French means silkworm.
Yeah.
So yes, I had great fun going in and choosing the materials, choosing the color threads, and doing the color scheme. Yeah.
So here we see your work in progress right here in the bottom right.
Yes, that's a work in progress, definitely. And you can see there the technique that I'm using for the Lotus Flower is a technique called silk shading or needle painting. And it's one of the hardest techniques to master in embroidery, because basically each stitch needs to be like a pencil mark in a drawing. So this embroidered effect, you're trying to give the effect that the embroidery was drawn, that it isn't actually done with stitches.
And it really looks it too. I mean, I love that it's needle painting, because that's indeed quite accurate.
Yeah, exactly.
Like it's created with a brush, not with a needle.
Yeah, and it's in the similar way where with each brush stroke you would consider the direction and you would blend your colors. You're making exactly the same decisions when you are doing each stitch in this. And you're recreating shade and tone and color blending. So yeah, it's quite technical.
Here's another view of of the Lotus in progress.
Yeah, this is it coming along now. I'm almost finished the Lotus at this stage, and I'm really, really enjoying it. It's really wonderful. But it's very slow. It's a very, very slow process. And if one stitch is in the wrong direction, I need to take it out and do it again. And yeah, so I need to have lots of patience.
Amazing.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful. I'm so glad that we could share that. I'd love to hear a little bit about this process with the Lotus, because I was reading an interview with you, and I loved how you spoke about intention, that
Oh,
each stitch is woven with intention, you know, and with a very specific kind of energy and feeling. And also, you almost have synesthesia when you work on this. You know, you hear music or sound or mantra, and when you touch the embroidery, that also evokes sound. So it's so remarkable. I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
yeah, absolutely. It was something that I had first heard of when I was doing the research in Mexico.
Mm.
A lot of the women would say that they embroidered all of their experiences and sadnesses and
Mhm.
joys into their
Wow.
work. Yeah.
Mm.
And then I had my first experience of that when I was completing my piece for a collassage. And like I was saying, it was a very long 6 months, working 14 hours a day. And it was the first time that I started listening to podcasts to,
Mhm.
pass the time and so on and so forth. And I found that when I would go back over to check on a piece that I'd finished, when
Mhm.
I touch it, I could hear the podcast that I'd been listening to
Oh my God,
when I was creating it.
it's
Yeah.
glorious.
Yeah, it was really, really interesting. Or if it was music that I was hearing for the first time and listening to an album over and over, I could hear it again. Or conversations I was having with people. So
So for
yeah.
this particular embroidery,
Mhm.
you're listening to sacred chanting.
That's right. Yes, I'm very honored and very grateful to have the opportunity to be listening to sacred chanting. And my wish or my hope is to embroider this chanting, to embellish this embroidery with this sacred chanting. And like you were saying, the intentions that I have towards the embroidery is, intentions of goodness and
Yes,
goodwill
yes.
and compassion towards
Mhm.
green Shakti workers.
Oh, that's so touching and beautiful. And we could feel it even as it's in progress. There's something really magical about this lotus as it's coming to life and showing its divine splendor.
That's it, as it's blossoming.
So before we take a few questions, Rebecca, I would love for you to share a little bit about your future projects and about Textile Tours of Paris and your embroidery kits.
Yeah,
You're working on some really wonderful things that I think everyone would be keen to hear about.
yeah, okay. Well, in September 2019, I launched a new business called Textile Tours of Paris, and it is where people can where I bring people on guided tours of the haberdasheries. So haberdasheries are like supply stores, so
Mhm.
threads and needles and so forth. And Paris has this incredible concentration of the finest quality scissors, threads, buttons, beads, anything you can think of. And they're all handmade in France. And for me, it's just this fascinating heritage. And I love sharing it with people. um,
Amazing. I can't wait for travel to resume.
yes.
I'm your first client in line. I want a tour, and you do the flea market as well. You do marché aux puces, and which I think everyone needs a guide for.
Yes, absolutely. It's quite
Yeah.
the one. And the flea market that I'll be working in is the oldest flea market in Paris. And it's again part of the fascinating history here. There was so much needlework that you have these beautiful vintage trousseaux,
Mm,
you know, hand embroidered lace cuffs, embroidery patterns, beads, buttons, linens, and yeah, the alleys are very winding in the flea market, and it really, for me, I'm really excited to start those tours now in September and start bringing people around and showing them my secret spots.
beautiful. And tell us, Rebecca, a little bit about this burgeoning embroidery kit business.
Yes, well, for me, you know, embroidery has had a very, very special part in my life. And for me, embroidery has enriched my life through beauty and through, you know, detaching and being able to meditate from our busy lives. And what I wanted to do was to combine the beauty of embroidery with a positive mental and emotional health practice.
Mm,
Um,
I love that.
so yeah, you know, two things which I am very passionate about and dedicated to. So I have for a long time done affirmations every morning. And for a long time, I usually forget them by about 11 o'clock in the morning. Living in Paris with the metro and so on and so forth, it's easy to
That
forget.
sounds familiar. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So a year ago, I decided to try and embroider my intentions
Mm.
and yeah, to just embroider my affirmations. So it was combining what I'd learned about intentions, being embedded into embroidery. And I just thought I'd see how it would go if I could remember a bit better. If I could make it to 12, I would have been delighted. um, and the effects were just, they were really wonderful. And it felt as if the affirmations were being embroidered into my being.
Mm.
And I could close my eyes easily and see my hands working or see the colors, and the affirmations just, they became a part of me.
Mm.
So this is what I'd like to share with others. So in the near future, I will be launching my embroidery kit company. That is to come.
That's incredibly exciting.
Yeah, yeah, I'm very, very excited about it. Yeah.
So we have a few questions.
Ah, of course. Yeah.
And firstly, which was on my mind as well, do you do private commissions?
I do, yes, I do.
Yeah.
I do private commissions, yeah, yeah. It's just, I think the main thing is that people remember how long it takes.
Right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's no haute-couture embroidery on Amazon.
No, it is not. And that's how we want to keep it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, I would be delighted to discuss commissions with people. Yes.
And I put Rebecca's website in the chat box so people can reach out to her.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Rebecca, tell us, how did you decide on the actual colors of the lotus? We saw that beautiful photograph with all the different threads.
Yeah. Well, I actually had quite a long consultation with Natalie, who runs Over Soie, and I was very excited to tell her about my project and about Green Shakti, and she was also delighted to be participating. And we took a long time finding the threads because, in actual fact, I forgot to mention this. The thread that I'm using for the Lotus embroidery is the first filament that's pulled out of the cocoon. So it's the finest, purest silk. And with that, there's a smaller color range in the dyes. So myself, you know, if I had gone for a slightly lower grade of silk thread, I had 660 colors to choose from. But we decided, no, only the best threads for this. So myself and Natalie took a long time figuring out how to arrange the color scheme, because they, you know, they didn't have the perfect color scheme needed to do a lotus.
Right.
Yes.
So it
So,
went from a choice of 660 to how many threads?
oh, I think we had to create the color scheme. I think there's a range of about 60 or 70 in the finest silks. Yeah. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about, there's a question about how you teach embroidery.
I teach embroidering?
Yeah,
Um,
because
okay.
you touched a little bit upon it in terms of the holistic experience, but it's more than embroidery, right? It turns out to be a very psychological experience.
Yeah, for me, you know, like I mentioned, my background when I was in university, I studied embroidery as a fine art,
Mm.
and I actually qualified as an art teacher. So I was an art teacher and a textile artist. And for me, embroidery, or more it's called creative embroidery. Um, I usually start off by teaching. I do workshops here in Paris. So my first workshop for beginners is called Samplers of Seduction, and
Great.
there's a story behind that. But
That's
these,
catchy.
I know, yeah. But I teach the 15 basic embroidery stitches, and I always say to students, this is like a dictionary.
Mm.
And then thereafter, it's up to you to create your own thesaurus. So to
Oh,
never,
lovely.
yeah, to never feel that there's a right way or a wrong way. I teach the basic techniques, and then it's up to you to have fun, to explore, to try out different threads, try out different colors, and basically express yourself through embroidery in the same way that you would express yourself through painting or drawing or ceramics. That's very much my approach.
Rebecca, how do we keep track of you? So we have your website. Are you blogging? How do we get updates on your projects? Tell us technically.
Oh yeah, well I have two websites. One is RebeccaDevaney.ie, and then the website that's more about my textile tours and my embroidery classes is textiletoursofparis.com. And at that website, you can sign up for my newsletter. So I am on Instagram and I'm on Facebook, but the newsletter, I kind of put in interesting articles that I read or video clips that I've seen, all around the whole theme of textiles and what textiles mean to people and how they can enrich our lives. So I'd say the newsletter would probably be the best. Yeah.
Rebecca, is there a center of embroidery that you haven't visited yet that you're dreaming of?
Oh yeah, there's a long list, Sonya.
Give us a few nuggets.
Oh, okay. I would absolutely love to go to along the silk route. Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan is big on my list. I
I
would
can
also,
vouch for that. It's a remarkable experience for sure.
I can only imagine. I can only look at pictures, Sonia,
Yeah.
for the moment. Then I also would love to go. This is going to sound very strange. There's a tiny village in Sardinia, and
Doesn't
there,
sound strange at all. Sounds wonderful.
yeah, and there's a small number of women in the village who still wear their traditional costumes. And in that village, women would begin to make their dresses when they were teenagers, and they only had one dress for the duration of their lives. And they continued to embroider it throughout their lives.
Wow, what a
Yeah,
concept. And this continues.
this continues. Yeah, there's a few women left who do. There are a few women left who still do it.
Wow.
Yes, that would be number two on my list. And then number 3 on my list is going to sound a bit strange, but I would love to do a bit more research on the embroidery that's done in convents.
Yeah.
Because I'm remembering that I'm Irish, so I'm fascinated by the work that nuns did in educating women through embroidery.
And the devotion, right? There's so much devotion inherent in that process.
Absolutely, devotion and time and patience, and I just think it's wonderful, these nuns who travel to very far-flung places with the intention of educating women, and again that was done through embroidery. So you will find me knocking on convent doors next.
Rebecca, thank you so much. Really, we have learned so much. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your secrets and your work. And we're very inspired, and we're all ready to take your tour in Paris. So count on us. We'll be there. And I just want to remind everyone to go to greenshakti.org for updates on the Lotus Embroidery and its auction, which will happen the week of October 5th to October 10th. Also sign up for Rebecca's newsletters to keep updated on what Rebecca is up to and her travels. And thank you, Rebecca. This was delightful. How fortunate I feel that we sat next to one another in a very small upstairs cafe in Chennai. Thank you for
Sonya.
joining us.
Okay, well, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much for listening, and for all the excellent questions as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Wonderful to have you. If you have any further questions, please reach out to us, to Rebecca, to me, or to Natalie at greenshakti.org. Thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful weekend. Thank you, Rebecca.
Bye. Bye-bye.